Well, good morning, everybody. It is a pleasure to be back. When I was here in October, we had that freak snowstorm. What an odyssey that is for a California boy, trying to get out to the airport in the middle of that snowstorm. For those of you who have not met me before, it's nice to meet each and every one of you. Sillarena.com is my portfolio. If you're interested in seeing more of the work I do, that's the place to head. Speedliting.com is where I intermittently write about the world of lighting. And then I love Twitter, man. That whole, blogging is heavy lifting, and Twitter is great. 140 characters, and I got to get it all started and finished. So if you follow folks on Twitter, feel free to follow me. Nikonians, we're going to talk about Canon buttons and dials, but I promise you the vast majority of the concepts that we go through today are really about light. So one of the things that I tell everyone is it's really about the photograph and not about the gear that we created it with. There's many roads to get to the same photo. So with that in mind, why do we use multiple flashes? And I'm going to stand right in your line of sight, and I apologize for that. They told me this is where I'm supposed to stand. They got some gaffer's tape on my right foot. So why use multiple flashes? I'm a person who gained a little bit of notoriety by ganging up 12 speedlights, 9 of which were borrowed, and made a photograph of my son while he was smashing the heck out of a bunch of Cinderella pumpkins several years ago. And then I got this book deal to write about Canon speedlighting, and that photograph then became the cover of the book. So I often get accused of being a guy who immediately runs out and uses way more speedlights than necessary. And I'll admit, sometimes that's absolutely true. If I have a whole bunch of speedlights around, if we were at a workshop or a meetup or whatever, at some point I'd say, okay, let's see how many speedlights we can get to fire off. But truth be told, I'm really lazy. And if I can get the job done with available light, then that's what I'm going to do. If I can get the job done with one speedlight, great. But I want to take you on a quick tour of some of the reasons why you might want to use multiple speedlights. And to be honest, when you hear speedlight, just insert the word flash, because the reality is, with the exception of high-speed sync, we can do everything I'm going to talk about today with big flash as well. Okay? So the traditional approach to using multiple flashes comes out of the studio. So we have the key light, which is the main light on the subject. Then we'll have a fill light, because one of the things to understand about film as well as our digital cameras is that neither can record the full range of brights and darks that we can see. And so oftentimes we've got shadows that have been created, and your eye can see in all the detail you want in those shadows, but the camera doesn't have the ability to record the detail. So we add a fill light in there. And then, because we went to photo school and we learned about 3 lighting headshots, we're going to add the accent light on the shoulders and the hair. And you combine those 3 lights, and you come up with a very classically lit senior portrait. This is my son, Tom. You're going to meet each of my 3 boys today in photos. And so this was classically lit senior portrait type headshot that we did. And a lot of people never get beyond this, and that's perfectly fine. If you're doing this classical type of lighting, then understanding the use of that is perfectly fine. But one of the great things that we can do with speedlights, how many of you here are familiar with high-speed sync or auto FP sync? High-speed sync is a speedlight only function. It's available when you put your Canon speedlight on top of your Canon camera. And what it does is the camera changes the way that the flash fires. And rather than push out one big pulse of light, it turns it into a machine gun. It goes for just a brief fraction of a second. Effectively, it's turning that speed light into a continuous light source, which enables you to use really fast shutter speeds. Normally, with most of our cameras, our ability for the shutter to fire is limited when the speed light's turned on to a 200th or a 250th of a second. If you have a 5D Mark II, it's going to be a 200th of a second. If you have virtually any other camera, it's going to be a 250th of a second. Now, I live halfway between LA and San Francisco, and the sun is almost always shining in California, of course, except during winter. And living in a sun-drenched environment as I am, it's important for me to be able to control the intensity of that sunlight. So from your own experience, when you shoot into the sun, you have to add light to your subject because that subject is backlit. So one of the things that happens in high-speed sync is it gives us the ability to shoot at a fast shutter speed, a 4,000th of a second, in the case of this photograph. And then I had to fill in on the shadowy side of this pit bull, which was the subject of a magazine article that I was photographing for. And in order to get those speed lights to fire in the 4,000th of a second to manage the sun, I had to jump into high-speed sync. But the dark side of high-speed sync is that when you switch over, it consumes 2.5 stops of flash power. So you're effectively, if your speed light is in full power, when you jump over to high-speed sync, it's effectively turned over to 1/6 power, because the camera has to, or the speed light has to recycle literally 30,000 times a second for a fraction of a second. So doing a lot of high-speed sync work, I gang up 2 or 3 speed lights to make up for that power loss. All right? I think later this morning we're going to take a look at how I created this shot. Here's another reason to use multiple speed lights that I think is pretty innovative. Here's a shot I did for a workshop up in Maine, and Canon had sent down literally a suitcase full. I had 24 speed lights, and so I used 7. Why 7? Because I couldn't find my other triple threat bracket. If I could have found that other bracket, I would have used 10. If I could have bolted in 15, I would have bolted in 15. The point was that you see that cable flying in there? That, and I'll show you this technique. I attached 1 speed light to my camera with an extra long ETTL cord and made that speed light the master. The other 6 were the slaves, and I controlled that whole system from the back of my camera, and I'll show you that on the screen in a little bit as well, exactly how I do that. But one of the great differences between using several speed lights and using a large power pack is that with our Canon system, we could control the whole party from the back of our LCD. Runner's in the water, I'm in the water, stand is in the water, cable's running through the water, okay? Not worried about any of it. And I'm able to control that whole system from the back of my camera in real time, okay? Now, did I need 7? No. I probably could have filled up this umbrella with 3. Keep in mind that a speed light throws the light out to the front. So when you're in a large mod, like a 60-inch silver umbrella, you've got to use 3 of them or so that you can fill up each quadrant of that. And the other 4 were in there really for show. Although I'll say this, the legitimate reason to use them is that 7 speed lights firing at, say, 1/16th power will recycle much faster than 3 speed lights firing at 1/2 power. So the more speed lights you use, the lower each one is going to fire, the faster that whole system. So if you're doing sports photography or any kind of event photography where you need really fast recycle times, ganging up several speed lights inside of a modifier, like that's my all-time new favorite right there, the Westcott Apollo Orb. Okay, so another reason to use multiple speed lights, this is what I call gang light. And gang lighting, the difference between gang lighting and just piling a bunch of speed lights inside of a mod is that there's no modifier here. I've literally bolted the speed lights to a piece of oak that I bought at Home Depot, screwed in a bunch of cold shoes. And this was a test shot. This was part of the Smashing Pumpkins shoot. And what stunned me was how beautiful the light was. It truly set me back. I didn't expect this. This was an afterthought. And the image you see on the left is no flash, aperture priority, no exposure compensation. That image on the left is the image that the camera wanted to make. And that sumptuous light, what I call cinematic light, which is the topic of this afternoon's presentation, comes about by underexposing the ambient and then wrapping the subject, my son Vin, son number 2. Now you've met 2 out of the 3. All right, wrapping Vin in beautiful light. And what happens is, and this was the shocking part, the speed lights over here were throwing shadows that way. And the speed lights over here were throwing shadows that way. But they were each filling the shadows of their neighbors. There's a synergy created. And what I realized is I can create soft light without putting anything in a softbox. So if I'm shooting high-speed sync, this was a high-speed sync shot in order to dim the ambient. Okay, I needed to shoot at about 1,000th of a second to make those clouds look dark and moody. It wasn't really a stormy day. The camera on its own couldn't capture the detail in the clouds. They're blown out. So I underexposed the ambient and brought the light to my subject. And so by going into high-speed sync, I took a 2.5 stop power loss. If I'd been using a diffuser, a disc, a softbox, or anything, I would have taken another 2-stop hit in the power. So this idea of gang light. So if you have a couple of speed lights and your friend has a couple of speed lights and somebody else has a couple of speed lights and you guys get together for a shoot, then you can do exactly this. You can wrap your subject with a whole bunch of speed lights and forget the modifier. So what are the options for triggering multiple speed lights? All right, we're going to look through the 4 main categories. Canon's built-in wireless system takes a lot of heat. It's really confusing and hard to learn. It's like learning a foreign language. But I have to tell you, after working with this for several years, I've done a pretty good job decoding it for myself, I think. I'll get you into the basics today. But this has become my main way of using multiple flash. Everybody's like, it's crazy, it doesn't work. You take it outdoors, it doesn't work. I tell you, I shoot this built-in system outdoors under California sun, which they tell me is the same sun you guys have here in New York. All right? I shoot this outdoors under full sun all the time. The trick is you just have to know how to make sure that the slave eye sees the communication coming from the master. All right, so we're going to go into the details of how to do this. Another option that a lot of people like are manual radio triggers. Now by manual, what that means is that you're going to have to walk around to each and every speed light and change the power level. That's fine if it's a calm, collected kind of place. You can walk around if you're doing headshots or whatever. Great, no worries. If you're photographing, a gymnast going through his or her routine, maybe not so great to have to continually walk around and change the power level. Manual radio triggers can be as inexpensive as 20 bucks and as expensive as, say, 300 bucks a unit, $300 or so for that Pocket Wizard Multimax on the right-hand side of the screen. My favorite middle-of-the-road approach is shown on the left-hand side of the screen. That's the Elinchrom Skyport. It's about 200 bucks for radio, transmitter, and receiver. So you've got to have a piece to go on your camera and one to go on each of your speed lights. Or you've got to have a splitter on the receiver and jury rig them that way. So basically what this system enables you to do is to tell your speed light or your studio strobe, fire. It doesn't say anything other than fire. $20 trigger says fire. $300 trigger says fire. It doesn't say anything beyond that, all right? Now ETTL radio triggers. ETTL is Canon's proprietary technology, evaluative through the lens metering for flash. And basically this is how the camera and the speed light work together to calculate what the flash power should be, in theory. In theory. It comes close most of the time. Sometimes it's dead on and sometimes it guesses wrong. But it's still the photographer's role to control that. Now with an ETTL radio trigger, we've got some advantages. We can shoot in ETTL, or we can shoot in manual, or we can shoot in stroboscopic. Okay? And we can control the system from our camera. Some of the radio trigger technologies give you the ability to use the entire menu system that's on the camera. And some of the radio trigger technologies give you a portion of that menu system, but not either. My favorite shown here is the Pocket Wizard Control TL system. That little gadget on the right-hand side is, for me, an essential part. It's called the AC3 Zone Controller. And what that does, ingeniously, is enable me to run part of my flash system in ETTL, part of my flash system in manual, and if I want to turn part of it on or off individually. That, unfortunately, is technology that Canon doesn't give us via the built-in system. I can't turn off Group B, for instance, and run Groups A and C for a while if I want to. Okay, so in that traditional shot, traditional 3-light portrait I showed you, where I had the key light, the fill light, and the hair light, I literally had to run around and shut those speed lights off so I could capture just the fill light or just the hair light. And it's important to do that from time to time so that you know what your various groups of flash are doing for you. So the AC3 Zone Controller, when parked on top of the TT1 or the TT5 gave me functionality, and I have to confess, it was a student of mine who showed me the AC3 zone controller, and before that, I actually didn't care for the system. Once he gave me that functionality, I finally had that aha moment. If you're just starting out and you're looking for an inexpensive way, a relatively inexpensive way to get started, another option, this is very old school technology, is to put an infrared trigger into the hot shoe of your camera. And basically what that is a small flash tube behind a really thick piece of red plastic that sucks up all the visible light from the flash but allows the heat signature to pass through. And then these little slave circuits can be plugged into the Speedlight. Canon Speedlights don't have an optical slave built into them. But on the 580EX2, there's a PC port on the side, so you can get a slave circuit to plug into that. Or you can get a hot shoe adapter that has the little mini phone jack in it, and then you plug the appropriate slave, which is the one on the far right, that mini phone jack. One thing to know about is that if you're going to use optical slaves with Canon Speedlights, the best ones to use are made by a little company called Sonya. And Sonya makes slaves with green bases, yellow bases, and orange bases. The green-based ones are the ones that work with Canon flashes the best. If you come upon the orange base, what's going to happen, it's going to fire one time, and it's not going to reset. So the green-based ones solve that problem. I still have a few of these in what I call my MacGyver box. This is a little tackle box I carry with me with all these random parts. If I find myself in a situation where I've got to shoot somebody else's flash or studio strobes and I want to throw a few Speedlights in there, it's handy to have these optical slaves. I don't use them very often, but boy, they save my hiney from time to time.
Can you use it, when you said that, can you use these on like a Nikon, if you have a Nikon flash, you can plug one of these in? And
Sure. Now, Nikon Speedlights have an optical slave circuit built in. It's called SU4 mode. And so if you turn on SU4 mode in your Nikon Speedlight, you will basically have, it will fire when it sees a pulse of light. Now, one thing to understand, though, is that if you're mixing Canon and Nikon Speedlights and you're using the Canon Speedlights with a built-in wireless system, as you're going to see in just a moment, the master is going to communicate to the slaves via a series of pre-flashes, and those pre-flashes will trick the Nikon Speedlight, the SU4 sensor, into firing early. That, by the way, is true for most studio packs as well. So it's kind of a challenge. If you're going to run a mixed system, you have to basically run everything in optical slave mode, okay, rather than use the built-in wireless system, because when we talk about the master, very convenient segue here, okay, the master Speedlight is the Speedlight that's connected to the camera's hot shoe. Now, you have to have that connection one way or the other. It can be right in the hot shoe, or in the case of what I've set up here, there's a 33-foot cable between the hot shoe and the Speedlight over in that softbox. And I don't think the camera has any idea that I moved the Speedlight away from the hot shoe, because the camera can still talk to that Speedlight. So the master's job is to send instructions to the slaves, and it does that via a series of pre-flashes. Now, this Morse code of light comes out of the master so rapidly that we don't see it as being a distinct flash separate from the flash of the exposure. Some people who have supersonic vision claim that they can see it. I'll let them believe that. I'm not sure that we can. One thing to know about the master also, particularly if it's in the camera's hot shoe, is that you have the ability to disable that master. And we're going to go through how to do that in a little bit. But disabling the master is a very valuable tool. And what that means is not that it's no longer the master, but that it communicates the instructions to the slaves through the Morse code pre-flashes, and then when the shutters actually open, it goes dark. What's the problem with a Speedlight in the hot shoe in terms of the light that it throws at the subject? Well, it hits the subject from both sides of the lens equally. All right? How many, quick question, how many of you are coming this afternoon? Okay. Thank you guys for, you're going to hear this again, but we'll do a quick sidebar. When you throw light right at your subject from the hot shoe, you're basically killing the shadows, and it's the shadows that enable us to see the shape and texture of the person or thing we're photographing. So if you move the speedlight and the camera apart from each other, then your speedlight is creating shadows which give you texture. So more often than not, I'll get to you real quick, more often than not, your speedlight, if it's in the hot shoe, needs to be disabled as a master or dialed down to a very low power so it's just pushing some light into the shadows. Because if you have it on full blast, it's going to kill all the shadows. Okay, question?
Just very quickly,
Yeah.
I was looking at what you're listing. I only have a 430. Does that apply or not?
So, great question. 430 series cannot be used as a master. Okay, you're going to see in the next slide, or 2 or 3, that it can be used as a slave. Okay, so for a master, you have to have a 580EX or EX2, or the old 550EX will also work, as will Canon's 2 macro lights, the ring light and the twin light. Okay. Now, somebody over here has an STE2 controller. This is a little box that sits in the hot shoe. Okay. I'm not a fan, and the reason that I'm not a fan is that it's not a very flexible piece of machinery. For instance, I can't turn it sideways if I put my slaves over here. I can't turn it up if I put my slaves over here. If I go out into that bright California sun, it often is blinded because it has a real low power flash tube in it. Okay? If you're indoors, more often than not, it's going to get the job done. Okay? As will the pop-ups on the 7D and the 60D cameras. It's really been exciting to see Canon for the very first time in the history of their speedlights enable a pop-up flash in your camera to control an off-camera speedlight. So what camera body do you have, ma'am? Uh-huh.
I have the an SDI.
Okay. So if you had a 7D or a 60D, holidays are coming up, you never know. If you had a 7D or 60D, you could control that 430EX as a slave from your camera. And I think, frankly, if you're beginning with, and you have one speedlight, using your pop-up is a great way to start learning. You'll eventually get the hang of it and go, gosh, I want to put my slave over here, and that pop-up is throwing all the signal that way. So I need something else. But it's a great way to get started. Okay? One thing to realize is that we can use any mode with Canon's built-in wireless system. A lot of people think, oh, it's just ETTL, it's just automatic flash. No, you can run the entire system in manual. In fact, if you change the mode on the master speedlight, the next time it sends out the pre-flash to the slaves, push the shutter button down halfway, it'll flash. The slaves are going to change mode. You don't have to walk around to each individual one and say, we're shooting this in manual now, or we're shooting this in stroboscopic. Slaves will follow. Basically, you set the slaves on the same channel as the master. And I'll tell you what that means in just a minute. I know I'm throwing out a lot of jargon. But it's an incredibly convenient technology to not have to be able to run around and change all the slaves from the power level or the shooting mode. Anything you do on the master will be communicated out to the slaves. So your slaves. Slave speedlight, by definition, is off camera. I've had a few students try to put a slave in the hot shoe of the camera and think that they're going to put the master somewhere else. I was like, no, it doesn't work that way. Because if there's a connection to the camera's hot shoe, that becomes the master. All right? Now, you can have any number of slaves. If you all held up a speedlight and we programmed them all as slaves, I could, of course, control everyone and everything. All right? So that's another very helpful thing. We don't have to run out with a couple $100 bills every time we want to add a speedlight to our flash system. This built-in system is free. We already have it. We just have to learn how to make it work for us. So in terms of slave speedlights, 580, EX, EX2, the 550, and the 430s. And then the new 320EX and the new 270EX2. The original 270, which is just a kind of a little 2 AA battery flash designed for like the G series cameras and the smaller pocket cameras. It didn't have slave functionality. So I have now in my kit a 270EX Mark II with the slave function, and it's really handy. If I need to put a little pool of light in the shot because it's about this big. It's really tiny. I can just throw it in there behind a Coke can, and it's going to throw light into the shot. It's very, very handy to have that technology. Now, this is a really important little detail that a lot of people miss. That big red panel on the bottom of the speedlights, and every generation they come out with, it seems like that red panel gets bigger and bigger. That's for the marketing department as far as I'm concerned, because we think those red panels are really important and we like them. The reality is that red panel controls the autofocus assist lights, which are relatively tiny. And that black panel that nobody ever pays attention to just above the red panel is the slave sensor. That's really, really important to know, because a lot of people don't realize that it's that slave sensor panel that needs to be pointing towards the master speed light. If you get that, you go, oh, all right. Now all of a sudden this built-in system becomes far more reliable. So one thing you need to do, this is a simple 2-light shot. I've got my master on the camera, and you can see I've turned the head over towards the slave. And you'll also note that I've turned the body of the slave so that the sensor is facing the master. We're shooting outdoors in full sun. Late afternoon in California, high-speed sync, little headshot. Son number 3, Tony, I'm sneaking him in. You've now met pretty much the entire arena arsenal of boys. So if you can sort out how to use the pan and tilt functionality on your master and get it so that it's pointing towards the slaves, you'll have great success with the built-in wireless system. Now, sometimes the geometry of the shoot is such that an on-camera master can't illuminate multiple speed lights. So years ago, what I started doing, I have those OC3 cords, just little short coiled cords that Canon sells for about 65 bucks a piece. And I ended up with 3 of them to get like 10 feet of stretch on the master, like $200 worth of cords to move that master. So about a year ago, because I couldn't find anybody to do it for me, I started this little company in my garage, literally, called OCF Gear, and we sell these extra long ETTL cords. And the good news is that B&H has agreed to start selling them in the very near future. And the exciting thing about these cords is that I can now, for about 65 bucks, I can move my master off camera and use it to control multiple slaves, okay? Or, if you're thinking one step ahead of where these slides are, you can move your master off camera and have it contribute usable light in the shot, as well as control slaves. So for instance, I can fire the master inside that Westcott orb and have it control a slave speedlight over here behind my subject. Okay? So I think these cords, a lot of people say, oh, poo-poo, it's all wireless. You know what? Photographers have dealt with cords for a long time. Eventually, I've no doubt, eventually Canon will put wireless technology, radio technology, right into their speedlights. And we'll end up, at least some of us, paying for that technology. Okay? But in the meantime, the ability to move the master off the top of the camera to get new geometries is really, really exciting to me. So now, how do we get our speedlight to work as a master? How many of you have a 580EX2? Okay, good number of you. How many of you have a 580EX? All right. So, and when they came out with EX2, I was a little surprised that they got rid of my favorite little lever on the bottom of the speedlight. With an EX, it's very easy, as you'll see in a moment, to change it from being a regular old speedlight to being a master or a slave. With an EX2, you have to know that that sideways flash bolt that's next to the word zoom, I call that the everything else button. That's the gateway to the wireless menu on this speedlight. maybe a radio tower with some radio waves shooting out would have made more sense. But that signal, that symbol, is the gateway. So to access the wireless menu, to turn it as a master or as a slave, you have to push and hold that button down for 3 seconds. Now, anything on your Speedlight menu that's flashing at you, it's basically saying, hey, do you want to change this? And so to change it, if you have a 580, you turn the wheel. If you have a 430, you push the 2 buttons. Okay? Until whatever selection you're looking for is on the screen flashing, and then you hit the set button in the middle. And you've locked it in. So a 580EX2, we're going to push and hold the zoom everything else button for 3 seconds. Eventually the word off flashes. We turn the wheel, then master flashes. We hit the set button. It's now engaged as a wireless master. Okay? This is the old 580EX. 430EX looks exactly the same, except it doesn't have the master function. It says off, master, slave. Boy, that is so easy. Boom. Okay? I know the reason that Canon got rid of it is because the 580EX2 was weatherproof and shoot in the rain. Okay? I have to go on vacation to shoot in the rain, apparently. And so that switch was not weatherproof. My guess is in a future generation, Canon will do something similar to what Nikon did in terms of the power switch, and it'll say off, solo, or something like that, off, on, master, slave, so it's all right there. I miss this switch, but not so much that I use my 580EX as a master. I always use my EX2 because I can control it from the camera LCD. Stick with me on this part. I don't want anybody's heads to explode, but I'm going to go through some concepts relating to the wireless flash system. And this little flow chart is basically, if you keep hitting the zoom button, you go tap, 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 it's going to cycle through 4 menu options when your Speedlight is enabled as a master. So the first one is zoom. You're going to see this afternoon, for those of you who are coming, that I use zoom as a built-in light modifier all the time. I zoom my Speedlights to 105 millimeters just to put light on my subject's face and not to light everything around them. So I zoom manually. That's the first tap. It gets me to that zoom button. Zoom flashes. I then turn the wheel until I get, typically I drive it straight up to 105 millimeters. If I hit tap again and my Speedlight's enabled as a master, the word ratio pops up. I'll take you through what the ratios are, what that concept is. If I tap it again, it's going to say channel. I'll take you through that in the same sequence that we have them up here on the screen. If you tap it again, it's going to give you this crazy and really, really hard to see icon on your LCD. It's basically the Speedlighters gang sign, I think, enabled. It's like my master's enabled. Now it's not. Now it is. Now it's not. Now it is. Really hard to see those. I'll show you how to do this on the back of your camera after I take you through the hard way first, and then you'll really appreciate that on-camera control. All right, what's this whole business about groups? Well, a slave can do, or can be assigned to one of 3 groups, A, B, or C. Think of these groups as different work groups. They're going to do different things. Group A is maybe your key light. Group B is your fill light. And you want to adjust the amount of power between Group A and Group B so that you can control the contrast or the amount of bright and dark across your subject's face. The master's always a member of Group A. Remember that. Master is always a member of Group A. Even if the master's over on the right side of my set, because I always think of these ratio things, we'll talk about this, it goes A, B. I try to put my Group A lights on the left-hand side of the camera and the Group B lights so I can make sense of the numbers. But the master, wherever the master is, he's always a member of Group A. Slaves can be members of Group B and C as well as A. Don't use Group C unless you absolutely have to. When I was trying to teach myself this, and I lovingly say I wish I'd been around when I was learning this stuff, because I immediately, the artist in me said, oh, I want to use Group A and Group C. I don't want to use B. Well, you can't do that. And the way that Canon approaches Group C is a real workaround, okay, in terms of ETTL. In manual, it's really easy to do 3 groups. I very seldom do ETTL 3 group. Canon ratios. When we're shooting an ETTL, the automatic flash mode, camera and Speedlight are working together to determine what the flash power should be. If it says off, what that means is that every Speedlight, regardless of its group assignment, is going to fire off at the same power. Now, what is that power level? We don't know. The camera, the metadata doesn't tell us. Master fires out a pre-flash to the slaves. They all illuminate. Camera takes light meter readings, takes ambient meter readings, compares the two. That's the evaluative part. Comes up with its calculations of what the flash power should be. Tells us the master, here's what the flash power should be. Master pre-flashes that out to the slaves. They set themselves, and then they all fire at the right moment when the shutters open. True magic, if you ask me. True magic. So when it says ratio off, everybody's going to fire at the same flash power. All right? If you want less light out of that system, out of a particular Speedlight, just move it farther away, keeping in mind that the farther away you move that light, the harder the shadow edge is going to become. I typically work with 2 groups, sometimes with 3 groups. Okay? So AB. AB. Lock that in your head. It's not BA. The first number when we look at these ratios always refers to the A side. Stop. A stop is my jargon for saying I'm going to double or I'm going to have an exposure setting on my camera or my flash power. So if I change my flash power by 1 stop from 1/2, I'm either dialing it up to full power or I'm going from half power down to quarter power. Either direction. Stop doesn't tell you what direction it goes. It just says I've either doubled or I've halved something. Using the concept of stops, I can make changes to my shutter, because going from 125th to a 60th of a second is a 1-stop change. I can make changes to my aperture. Going from f4 to f5.6 is a 1-stop change. I can make changes to my ISO. Going from ISO 400 to ISO 200 is a 1-stop change. And as we work our way through advanced speedlighting techniques and we think we're going to dial the ambient exposure one direction and the flash exposure a different direction, we might be changing flash power and shutter speed in offsetting increments of the same number of stops. The only numbers that I have memorized, okay, and I've been at this a long time, I have the whole stops of aperture, okay, it's 1, 1.4, 2, 2.8, 4, 5, 6, 8, 11, 16, 22, 32, 45, 64, 90, 128. I'm an old view camera guy. That's where I learned those numbers. But it's really helpful to have those aperture numbers memorized. I don't want to make anybody run out screaming saying, I hate math. But when you're dialing all these knobs and dials in your camera, you see those things change inside your viewfinder. It's really helpful to know that when you've gone from 5.6 to 6.3 to 7.1, you've not made a 2-stop change, you've made a 2/3 of 1-stop change, because it goes 5.6, 6.3, 7.1, f8. So if you at least have the whole stops of aperture memorized, 5, 6, and 8, you'll know, okay, that's a big change.
Yeah.
Question?
I think your slide is mistaken. It says the same thing twice. The 1 to 2, A group is 1 stop darker.
Yeah. Thanks for reading. I appreciate that. Do you have any whiteout? I'll just change that slide right now. I appreciate that. It is wrong. I hate forgetting that, but it is wrong. But can I give away a B&H hat? Would you like a B&H hat, ma'am? We'll go find one for you because you pointed out.
How about a speed light?
Sorry. How about a hat?
Okay.
I'm not even sure I can swing the hat, but I'm going to try, okay? All right, you're absolutely right. So let's go down the list. 1 to 1 means that the A and the B groups are at the same flash power. 1 or 2 to 1 means that the A group is 1 stop brighter. Well, why is that 1 stop? Well, if we use the concept of stop being doubling or halving, 2 speedlights is 1 stop brighter than 1. All right? The other side of the ratio, disregard the bottom text here because the B and the A right here and right here should be switched. It should say 1 and 2 B group is 1 stop brighter than A group. Get an A+ on that one. Absolutely. All right. So what if we have a 4-to-1 ratio? How many stops brighter is group A than group B? Pop quiz. 2 stops. What about 8-to-1? Okay. Whoa, 8-to-1 is 3 stops. How does that work? Well, that's the right answer, by the way. Here's how it works. Every time we change by a stop, every time we open up the aperture, 1 full stop, every time we change the shutter, 1 full stop. When it comes to flash power, it works like this. If we double 1, what do we have? 2. That's a 1-stop change. All right? To get the next stop of power, how many speedlights do we have to add to that system? We have to double 2, not the 1. So we go 1 to 2 is 1 stop, 2 to 4 is a 2nd stop. Gets kind of expensive to get that 3rd stop because we're adding 4 speedlights. Okay? But that's why it's important to pick the right friends who have gear that they're willing to loan you. Okay? All right. Channel's really easy compared to ratios. That is like the pinnacle of toughness when it comes to Canon speed lighting. Channels are really easy. Channel 1, 2, 3, or 4. It's like walkie-talkies. The master and the slaves all have to be on the same channel. Okay? So somebody was firing off my slave earlier, so I solved that problem by switching channels. It's up to you to figure out which channel I fired off at. All right, now for the all-important concept of enabling and disabling the master. This is wonky vocabulary. If I could write the user manual, I wouldn't use enabled or disabled. Okay? Because disabling the master suggests that we've turned it off and it's no longer the master. And that was my own exploration of the subject. It's like, well, that's how I turn the wireless system on and off. No, that's not. That's not it. So again, the concept is this. Enabled. The master speedlight is going to communicate the instructions to the slaves, and then it will also fire when the shutters actually open. That happens so quickly that we seldom see it as being 2 distinct events. Disabled means that it does its pre-flashy Morse code, sends the instructions to the slaves, and then it remains dark when the shutters open. You're still going to see it flash.
It will still flash?
Oh, absolutely.
At the flash, you'll see a flash from the master, but the flash won't.
You'll see the flash. You'll see the, so I'm going to program, so I'm going to hook this camera up to the screens in a little bit so you can see it, but I'm just going to, okay. I'm going to fire this off right now. You guys ready to be blinded over there? Okay, we'll go easy on you. We'll just go, 1/8 power, but here it comes. Okay, so this is, just check. Wireless settings enabled, master flash enabled, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so this is the flash, and now this master, which is in that softbox, if it's going to fire for me. Oh, of course it won't fire. I love this. Compact flash card. Camera won't. I love this. It's like, imagine the camera won't fire without a compact flash card. The camera in the custom functions has the ability to fire without the card. Oh, I thought that'll be really convenient because then I won't make a fool of myself during situations like this where I'm being recorded. And then I make a bigger fool of myself when I'm out on a shoot without forgetting to put a card in. So, here we go. Okay, so that was the flash with the master enabled. So it sent the instructions. The master has no idea how many slaves are out in this room. Right now there's none. Well, actually there's one, but it's not really paying attention. Okay, so I'll go in here and I'm going to disable the master. Did that flash look perceptibly different?
Yes.
Some of you see it. That's why I say some of you have supersonic vision and some of you don't. To my eye, it's like, yeah, something happened over there. It was bright for a little while and now it's not. But I didn't see it go and send out that Morse code to the slaves and then pause, wait for them to do their pre-flash, do its calculations, send out the firing instructions, the timing signal, and then everybody fires. So the point is, now that master is disabled, but you're still seeing it fire. All right? So one of the challenges that I've run into from time to time is I'm shooting off camera master, boom, boom, boom. Then I switch this thing up and I put that guy in my hot shoe. And I'm not thinking through. And the master's not throwing any light in the subject. I think, well, it's not firing. That's because it's still in wireless mode and it's disabled. So, question.
It's throwing out light, isn't it? You're seeing
It
light.
is.
So why isn't that light?
Because that light is, that happens before the shutter opens. We're talking about thousandths of a second here of difference. That's the amazing thing about the Speedlight technology. Okay?
You can see that
I can,
on your readout.
sure, I can point this. Okay, there's my beautiful image. Okay, so let's just see.
Why are you using the cable?
The opaque.
The radio transmitter, radio trigger. Why the cable?
Let's be fair about this. Did you say that again? All right, you're going to have to leave now. All right, so there's the image with my dead pixels on the back, my rogue pixels on the back there. All right, so really quick, why am I doing this with the cable? That's a great question. I'm a total addict to the cable. And the reason that I'm a total addict to the cable is that if I have a master in the hot shoe, it's going to have a really hard time communicating with the Speedlight inside that softbox. Okay? The other thing is the cable's 65 bucks. The Speedlight in my hot shoe's 400 bucks. Okay? 475, whatever the current price is. They were $399 day before yesterday. All right, let's just do this really quick here. Enabled. Okay, so there's proof. You don't need to see anything other than there's white, and there's the shot just before with the master disabled. So it does all of that flashy business, communicating to the slaves, and then it goes dark when it's disabled. Okay? It's a key concept. But once you get it, it's like that aha moment. You go, okay, I get it. I get it.
How do you do the switching over from enabled to disabled?
Okay. So on your Speedlight, jump back here really quick. So you're going to, once your Speedlight is enabled as a master, you're going to use that zoom everything else button, tap, 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 and it cycles you through zoom, ratio, channel, master enabled, disabled. It's like a bus going on a circuit loop. If you miss the stop that you want, just keep tap, tap, tapping on the zoom everything else button, and you'll eventually come back around to that selection. Okay? It just 4 stops and just goes in a circle. So in this case, now I'm going to jump forward. And I will grant you that this is really, really hard to see on a Speedlight LCD. Good news is that if you got the right Speedlight and camera, you can do it all in the language of your choice in the back of your camera, which is where we're going to head pretty soon. But on your Speedlight, if you've got a 580EX, you have to do it the hard way. Or if you have a 20D or a 30D, you're going to have to do it the hard way. Okay? Because to get the on-camera LCD control, you've got to have a 40D or newer camera body and an EX2 580 or 430, or the new 320, or the 270 EX2. And what you're looking for, and it's hard to see, is that little Speedlighters gang sign of 3 fingers right there. That means it's enabled, and when they're gone, that means it's disabled. Okay? Yep.
There's no way that you can use the master to throw just a tiny little light unless you're totally in manual.
No. Oh, so the question is, and if I don't repeat the question, you got to kick me, okay? and you back him up, right? Just bring it on right there in the shin. So the question is there a way to get the master just to throw out a little bit of light? Absolutely. Okay. Anybody want to be brave and venture an idea as to how you do that?
Compensation, negative.
You'd use ratios. And so if you, what group is the master always a member of? A for arena. All right. So it's always a member of group A. If we want to have the B group be more powerful than the A group, what kind of ratio would we use? 1 to 2, 1 to 4, 1 to 8, okay, would make the B group, your slave, brighter than your master. So you might go, if you're an ETTL, you might set your ratio to 1 to 8, which means that your slave is going to effectively be the key light, assuming that it's a similar distance from your subject than the master. And then the master is just going to push out a breath of air.
So you do that in ETT?
These ratios are ETTL only.
That's,
Okay? So ratios are ETTL only.
okay.
How many of you feel like your head is spinning with all these concepts? I totally sympathize. My head is totally spinning. All right? Question.
Wouldn't negative exposure compensation also work?
All right, you guys ready? You're not going to let you kick me. Gentleman asked, won't exposure compensation also work? Did you say exposure or flash exposure?
Flash exposure. Basically.
All right. Canon has some functionality that Nikon doesn't have that I really like. Canon's exposure compensation is independent of flash exposure compensation. Exposure compensation gives us the ability to control the ambient exposure when we're shooting an aperture exposure shutter priority. Flash exposure compensation gives us the ability to dial the ETTL flash power up or down. If you're shooting multiple speedlights in different groups, flash exposure compensation dials the whole system up or down, not an individual group. So if we say we've got A group and B group here and we need more flash everywhere, then we dial flash exposure compensation up. If we need just the B group over here more powerful, then we use a ratio. See the difference? Great question. Great question. Okay. So let's talk about one of the hidden joys of the Canon system. I had an EX2 Speedlight for 2 years before I found this. And found was more like tripping into it and then losing it for a while and then finding it again. This is one of the aspects of our Speedlight system that I think needs to be shouted out to everyone in the world who shoots Canon. All right? This is a Canon-only function. Much to my surprise, you can't get this functionality to the extent that we can get it on a Nikon camera. Because a lot of us have been beaten down by all those guys who shoot Nikon who blog. My sensei, Joe McNally. All right? By the way, his new book, Sketching Light, is coming out any day. It's a must-have. Okay? Sketching Light by Joe McNally. Joe shoots Nikon, so there'll be parts of the book that don't translate. But you know how to get in touch with me, so you can ask me how to translate for McNally. But they can't do this. All right, so let's go ahead, and David, let's go ahead and switch this over. So what we're going to do is we're going to switch over the projector, and we're going to actually hook my camera up so that I can show you how I use this menu system. And then I think some of you will understand why I choose to have 33 foot of cord between me and my Speedlight that I can trip over all the time. I've gotten to be pretty good at the ballerina dance thing. Because this functionality is so great. I think we'll have to power the camera down and...
Which kind of camera do you
oops. Great question. Which camera am I shooting? That is so important when we're talking about this. That doesn't look good. All right. I have a 5D Mark II here. And that's really important because this Speedlight menu is in a different spot on almost every camera. All right, so let me get this hooked up here. David, I think this is broken. Do you have a spare? It looks like I stepped on the cord and it discombobulated. Okay, so there's these two speed lights, and they go into a bar. And the first speed light says, does anybody know the rest of this joke? Because I don't, and I'm trying to, like,
Let's give it one more shot.
you think? All right, here we go, Captain.
So we're going to be putting that on your account if it's not working.
That's, please do. Oh, and I owe this lady a hat here, too. She pointed out a mistake in one of my slides. And then escort her out of the building, please.
Anything?
No signal. All right.
Okay. I'll get you another.
Sorry about that. It's trying, but because it's not coming up on my... You want to try it?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Let me switch you back over to the other.
Yeah, that's fine. You can't just run out there and grab one?
Well, I got to run down the steps.
I come up with the new and original problems. Sorry about that.
This doesn't work for the 580?
So, going back to it, here's what we need for gear. Camera-wise, mid-2007 is when they introduced this technology. So camera-wise, a 40D, 50D, 60D, 7D, 5D Mark II. Now my brain fog is coming up. The 1DS Mark III, I think, is in there. The 1D Mark IV, the Rebel T3, 3i. All right, since I shoot the 5D Mark II, I unfortunately don't know those Rebel models as well as I should. Mid-2007. You can check in your camera, and when David bails me out here and charges my account for that very expensive little piece of plastic I broke, you'll be able to see that we pull it up and the menu position changes. So on a 5D Mark II, it's on the yellow wrench 3-dot menu. On a 7D, and you'll see what I mean by this, on the 7D, it's on the red camera 1-dot menu. All right? So you've got to have a compatible camera body, and you've got to have a compatible flash. So the 580 and the 430 EXs don't have this communication link. The 580 EX2 has the communication link. Okay? So, as do the, does anybody here have the 320 EX? It's kind of a mid-sized speed light, and Canon put a little LED light on there theoretically for video work. I'm a bit of a skeptic, I'll say, because it's on-axis light, and video follows the same rules of physics that photography does. So, yeah.
Can you use the 580 EX2 with the 580?
Sure. The question was, I don't want you guys, you're thinking about it though. Good job. Gentleman asked, can you use the 580 EX with the 580 EX2? And the answer is yes. Either of those two speed lights will work as a master, but I would use the 580 EX2 as the master and make the 580 EX the slave, so that I can get this on-camera control. I do have a couple of screenshots I'll show you, but it makes a lot more sense to see it live, and I'll take you through the entire wireless menu system. So on the left-hand side of the screen is a screenshot from the 7D. 60D works along very similar lines. And it gives you the ability to control the built-in pop-up flash as well as an external speed light. Okay? Now, one of the things down below, this is a screenshot off my 5D Mark II, and controlling the flash power in manual. So when I get this system up on the screen, you'll see I can control the power level in manual mode of Group A, Group B, and Group C independently. Okay? And I'll show you why, when I shoot 3 group, why I prefer to shoot in manual rather than in ETTL. Right? We talked a little bit about flash exposure compensation, so let me just back up. Even though it doesn't relate to wireless per se or multi-speed lighting per se, it's an important concept. When we're shooting in ETTL, the speed light throws out a pre-flash, and the camera takes an ambient meter reading, meaning no flash meter reading, flash meter reading from the pre-flash, an ambient meter reading again, compares all these numbers coming back, how much light's coming back, where it's coming from in the metering zones. If the speed light's in the hot shoe and just pointed straight ahead, not panned or tilted, it will also take the distance information off most Canon lenses. And all of this trying to figure out what flash power it should be. Now, the camera has no idea what your vision is as the photographer. These cameras are really, really smart, but they're not replacement for the human vision and the human sense of imagination. So in ETTL, often the image will come back being too bright in terms of flash or too dim. Those of you who are going to attend my lighting persona seminar will see how I put flash exposure compensation to use. The short answer is that flash exposure compensation gives you the ability to dial the flash power in ETTL up by a certain amount or down by a certain amount. And the amount is specified by you. And it can be from 1/3 of a stop plus or minus all the way up to 3 stops plus or minus. Now keep in mind, if your speed light's already firing at a half power level, adding 2 stops of power doesn't get you beyond full power. We can only go, if you say an FEC of 2 stops and your speed light's at half power, and the challenge is we don't know what flash power we're firing at when we're in ETTL. Now I use ETTL a lot, but I also use manual a lot. I use ETTL when I'm working really fast because I can take a shot, I'll look at the back of the camera, say, do I want more or less flash? I'll use flash exposure compensation to dial it up or down, and then I'll take my other shot. Manual is great because it's consistent from frame to frame to frame. Woohoo, let's give it up for David. Bails me out once again. So manual is great, and it's the flash mode I use when I'm doing very repetitive photography. If I'm shooting product, if I'm shooting a group, if I'm shooting, I shot an event last year where I had to do VIP portraits. Okay, I had Danica Patrick and a bunch of VIPs, and I had 15 minutes to shoot something like 60 people with Danica. So do the math. That's 15 seconds per session. And Danica very kindly let me know just before we were starting that she had no intention of standing there for all 15 minutes, that if I was the professional photographer I should have been, that we didn't need it. In fact, I got the job done in 11. So we shot 60 setups with Danica, 60 VIPs with Danica in 11 minutes. For that kind of situation, you absolutely don't need to re-meter because the lights are not moving, she's not moving, nothing is changing other than the people standing right next to her. So I use manual for that. Manual also is the mode you should use when you're learning flash. Because if you only shoot in ETTL, then you'll never have an idea of, well, this thing's overexposed, but I'm not sure why. Whereas if you're shooting in manual mode and you dial the power to full and it looks like a nuclear blast, you go, oh, okay, that's full power. I'm going to dial it down 1 stop to 1/2 power. Oh, that's not much of a change. I'm going to dial it down to a 30-second power. How many stops? Pop quiz. How many stops from half power to 30-second power? Well, let's see. If we go to 1/4 power, that's 1 stop. 1/8 is 2 stops. 1/16. 30-second is 4 stops. It's helpful to know 4 stops is a big move on flash power. Okay, so I'm going to be very careful since I apparently just purchased this, or the broken one. So here's what I mean when I say red camera 1 dot. This is a 5D Mark II. Okay? So if I had a 7D, the flash control menu is on red camera 1 dot. Okay? But to find it on the 5D, I scroll over to the yellow wrench with 3 dots. And conveniently it says external speedlight control. So what's happening is the camera, I'm going to do this again. These cameras were not made to shoot HDMI. They were intended to put your camera safely on the TV and look at your slideshows. So anyway, what's happening here is the camera is communicating to the speedlight over inside that Westcott Orb softbox. And if you were looking at the back of the speedlight as I make changes here, you'd see the changes happening on the back of the LCD. This is literally the flash control menu out of the speedlight. So one of the things I can do is I can change the mode. So ETTL, the automatic flash mode. The other reason that I use ETTL that I didn't mention is if I'm shooting a situation where the subject to flash distance changes. Let's say it's your granddaughter on a swing set. And sometimes you photograph and she's way back at the back of the arc, and other times you photograph and she's about to kick your teeth out. Okay? When she's farther away, the flash needs more power. When she's closer, the flash needs to fire at a lower power. So ETTL is going to do that calculation and come darn close. Okay? So if I'm in a situation where I want to use ETTL because my subject to flash distance changes, or because I just want to run, take a shot, look at the image, make a move in flash exposure compensation, and keep running, then ETTL is great. Again, if I'm shooting a situation where things don't change, then I'm in manual mode. Or if I need that consistency from shot to shot to shot, if that's important, then I'm in manual mode. I would say it's pretty close to 50-50 in terms of where I spend my time. Multi-flash is the stroboscopic function that 580 speedlights have, 580EX and EX2. Want to know a big secret? Your 430EX will jump into stroboscopic mode when it's set as a slave. I've never found it mentioned in any of the Canon literature. I don't know, maybe it voids the warranty, I don't know. But a 430EX is happy to fire off in stroboscopic mode just like a 580EX is, all right? Stroboscopic is basically where you get the flash to fire a whole bunch of times, but you really have to be shooting on a pitch black set, otherwise your ambient light, even over the course of a second or two, is going to creep in. So for right now, we're going to say that I'm in ETTL mode. I can change first curtain or high-speed sync. This is a curious point about Canon system. When the wireless system is activated, so I'm going to go back there and shut it off. When the wireless system is activated, we lose the ability to have second curtain sync. All right? This was a fundamental flash course. I'd show you slides of second curtain sync. Suffice it to say, if you're shooting things with long shutter speeds, shooting a holiday parade with folks who have glow tubes taped to their body and all that, then shoot in second curtain sync, and you'll get that blurry ghost image coming from behind them, whereas when you have it in first curtain sync, what happens is they get that ghosty thing going to the front of them, and it doesn't quite look natural. If you shoot weddings, bar mitzvahs, and those kind of things, people on the dance floor, same thing, where part of the image is being captured through a long shutter speed. And then high-speed sync. How easy is it to turn on high-speed sync? We have a dedicated button on our speedlights, the one with the H and the flash bolt. Or we can do it right here. The nice thing about doing it here is if I say, oh gosh, I've got to go into high-speed sync because I need faster shutter speeds, I don't have to run over to that speedlight, open up the softbox, reach my hands in, and do it over there. All right? So we're just going to go back to first curtain sync. Flash exposure bracketing, in my opinion, is a legacy of the film era. When I used to shoot view camera in medium format, we would bracket everything. We'd bracket our shutter and our aperture, and we'd bracket our flash power. We'd basically take 9 shots in the hope that one of them would work. And at $1 a frame for roll film, or $5 a sheet for view camera work, it was really expensive. One of the joys, there's nothing about film that I miss. One of the joys is I don't have to bracket like crazy anymore. Flash exposure compensation. So this is the mode when we're shooting an ETTL that enables us to increase or decrease the amount of flash. And if we're shooting multi-flash, it's going to raise or lower the entire system. So watch this. Flash exposure compensation is active. If I go here and turn it to manual mode, we don't have flash exposure compensation. Why do we not have flash exposure compensation with manual flash? Right. You are the flash exposure compensation person. When I switch this over to manual flash, I'm now dialing the power up or down. Okay? And by the way, the fact that the chords here is immaterial in terms of pulling up this menu. I'm pulling up the menu because I've got a compatible camera and Speedlight. If you have your Speedlight right here, it's going to do the same thing. Okay? I use this on-camera system all the time, even when my speed light is right here. How about zoom? We're talking about multi-speed lights. This is an important aspect. I generally want my master speed light, if it's disabled, if it's communicating to slaves and it's not part of the shot, I want my master speed light zoomed as wide as it needs to be to hit all the slaves. Auto mode normally means that when I have a zoom lens and I change the zoom on my lens and I hit the shutter button, the speed light is going to change the zoom setting. Come back. All right, we'll take a picture. There we go. Okay. So one of the things I can do is I can change the zoom. So if you guys will be really quiet, you can hear it. You'll hear it zoom. Did you hear it zoom? The gentleman says yes, fortunately. Not a huge thing to hear it, but I think it is kind of nice to be able to say, oh gosh, you know, I got it in that softbox. I should have it zoomed out wide so that it fills up the softbox, okay? Wireless setting. So disabled. Boy, doesn't this get confusing? Because we've got master enabled and disabled, and we have wireless function enabled or disabled. So wireless function is the on-off switch. So right now, disabled, I have no wireless functionality. That speed light is working by itself. It's all alone in the big world. Okay? So I enable it. Master flash. Do I want it on or off? Boy, this is so much easier than looking for those three little flashy things on the Speedlight LCD. Okay? This functionality for me was worth upgrading from my EXs to my EX2s. I own 5 Speedlights. I have 3 580 EX2s and then 2 EXs. Of course, that was the justification I used for getting the, additional ones. But having at least one EX2 in your system if you've got a compatible body. Channel. All right? So important thing to remember here, I'm changing the master only. I still have to change the channel on my slaves directly. Okay? So I can change the channel here. So now you know what channel, all right, whoever was firing my slave earlier, avert your eyes. I'm going to change. Okay. Flash firing group. This is the ratio business. What flash mode do we get ratios with again? ETTL. Okay? So in this case, A plus B plus C, little disconnect between the menu system and what I showed you earlier in terms of the nomenclature on my Speedlight. Speedlight is going to say ratio off. You don't see any of this menu system, do you? Because you need a Speedlight in your hot shoe to get the menu system up.
Yeah.
What camera body is that?
7D.
Okay. Will you give it back?
It's a little different anyway, right?
Here.
I got one.
Okay. Well, get it out and put it in so you can follow along with the song. Okay. So A plus B plus C is the same thing when the Speedlight LCD said ratio off. All the groups are firing at the same flash power as calculated by the camera. AB, look at that, okay? So now AB in manual mode gives us the ability to control individual groups. What do you think happens if I change this to ABC? Okay. I now can say, all right, my hair light, my fill light, and my key light. Okay? Did you guys notice by chance that I'm staying with those whole fractions? I mean, even as a pro shooter, I generally stay with the whole stops of flash power. I don't jump around. These 2 little dots in between are 1/3 stops. I make big changes until I get really close to where I want to be, then I'll fine tune. Write this down, but don't tell my kids I said this. You don't know that you've gone far enough until you've gone too far. Remember, don't tell my boys, you've met them all now. You don't know that you've gone far enough until you've gone too far. I firmly believe, particularly with flash power, in making big steps until I go, oh boy, that's too much, or oh boy, that's definitely too little. Well, the good news of stepping over that boundary is that you then know the right answer is somewhere in between. But I still stick with these whole stops of flash power until I get really close, and most often, whole stops is going to do great. Somebody says, "Oh yeah, up at 1 2/3 stops." Gosh, I'm just don't believe that 1 2/3 for most people is visibly discernible as being different than a two-stop move. Okay, so that's what these little dots are in between. Quarter, a one-stop change is halving or doubling.
Why
So,
aren't you on full power? So?
why am I not on full power in manual mode? All right, great question. So when I'm in manual mode, I'm not using a light meter. I have my old flash meter, my Minolta Flash Meter 4 in my kit. It's there really now. It's been in my bag. It's not on this trip. Oh my God, I'm gonna have a nervous breakdown. But it's been in my bag for 15 years, and I stopped using it 7 years ago. It's kind of like the old ratty teddy bear that's just tucked in the corner. I am going to have a breakdown later. I hope you guys won't mind. So my approach is the following. When I'm in manual mode and I don't have a clue where to start, I set everything to 1/8 power. Okay, 1/8, 1/8, 1/8. All right. And then I'm going to make my decisions from 1/8 power. Do I need more or less? If I need more, then I'll jump up to full power. All right, was 1/8 closer or is full power closer? And within 3 shots, I can get the flash exposure that I need. So I could say, oh yeah, 1/8 wasn't enough, but full is way too much, so I'll jump down to quarter. And generally, that's probably where I need to be. So if you start at 1/8 power in manual mode, you're halfway up or down, and you just jump to one end or the other, then you jump halfway back. And within 3 test shots, using the LCD to evaluate the lighting, I still use the histogram to evaluate my exposure. Lighting and exposure are 2 completely separate, albeit related, but separate questions that you ask your camera. So what happens to all of this? We don't want picture style. Here we go. I'm going to change this back to ETTL. Wireless settings. So now when I have AB, see how this has changed? Before in manual mode, when I had AB, it said group A power, group B power, and now it has that ratio business. So if I wanted the A side to be significantly brighter than the B side, I might jump to 4:1. I'm trying to keep it really simple here, okay? So also again, I put my A lights when I can on the left side of my camera. If I'm doing that traditional 3-light headshot thing, okay, I'll put the A light on the left, the B light on the right, because that's the way these numbers work. If then I want the right side to be brighter, I dial my ratio. I mean, it's pretty simple. I'll dial my ratio to the right-hand side. If you have your A and your B lights on other sides of the lens, then you've got to go backwards, okay? So you see down here it's grayed out and it says Group C exposure compensation. Here's the challenge that I have with the execution of 3-group lighting in ETTL. I get the AB ratio business. I can wrap my head around that. What's more of a challenge for me, though, is that Canon system uses the C group flash exposure compensation relative to the A-B group ratio, and my head just about explodes, and I'm thinking, I'm not going to shoot wireless. Okay? When I'm shooting 3-group, more often than not, I'm in manual. If you try to do this on your Speedlight, boy, that LCD gets to become really a challenge. I have to actually pull out a little chart to find my way through this. You can do it pretty easily on your Speedlight, or on your camera LCD rather than your Speedlight LCD, okay? So getting back out of here, we'll turn that whole system off. Flash firing, here's a quick trick. For a long time I didn't understand why I'd want to have a Speedlight in the hot shoe, but have the ability to turn it on or off, or shall I say enable it or disable it. Why would I want to have a Speedlight in my hot shoe but disabled? Not a wireless master, but just a single Speedlight. Anybody here shoot weddings? Bar mitzvahs where things are dark? Okay. If you're in a dim environment where the camera can't find enough contrast in the scene to focus on, put a speed light in the hot shoe, disable it if you don't want on-camera flash, and all of a sudden what you have is an autofocus assist beam that, like a Cylon from Battlestar Galactica, will reach out there, okay? And all of a sudden the camera can focus. All right? So there is no way, as far as I know, to do this on a Speedlight's LCD directly. Okay? All right, so enable. This one always bites me in the hiney too, because it's all of a sudden you do this, and then your Speedlight's not firing, and you see everything. It's like, oh yeah, let's go check that menu. Okay, any questions on the flash functionality in terms of driving it on the camera? Yes, in the back.
Probably went over this and it absorbed into my gray matter, but if you're going to have your A group, your master is off camera, what do you put on the camera to be able to use these menus?
Okay, so the question, I don't want, these guys are like, oh, come on, don't say the question so I can kick you. So the question, if I understand it right, is if you have your master off camera, what do you need to do to connect that master to the camera so you can do what I just did? Okay, my master right now is sitting inside that softbox over in the corner, and I used this 30-foot ETTL cord from OCF Gear. Okay, so use a long ETTL cord as one option. I mentioned the Pocket Wizard Control TL system, the Mini and the Flex. The challenge is that system has to translate in order to convert it to radio waves, it translates the Canon instructions into Pocket Wizardian, and then sends it over to, and retranslates it back to Canonista for the Speedlight. Well, you lose most of this functionality in terms of on camera. So right now, as far as I know, you've got two options. One is you put your master in the hot shoe, and it's going to send out the instructions to the slaves. And as long as your master is a 580EX2, you'll get this on-camera functionality. Or you have a 580EX2 over there in your softbox, and you have an ETTL cord. Because the key is you need to be able to maintain that ETTL communication between the camera and the Speedlight. If you have just a regular old PC sync cord, which you can get for about 15 bucks, that doesn't carry, there's 2 wires in it. This one has 5 or 6. So it carries that full communication. So those are the only 2 systems that I know of right now. Okay?
What about the little infrared Canon thing that you can...
Okay, STE2, great question. So the STE2 wireless transmitter, what sits up here, is 18-year-old technology. And it doesn't have that communication link. At some point, I have no doubt, Canon will come out with, what do you think it'll be called? The STE3, and it will have that functionality, okay? I recently tested a knockoff of the STE2 made by the China company Yongno or John Snow. My Chinese isn't very good. It's virtually a knockoff of that, and it has the camera menu system capability as well as the ability to turn that little box like, I don't know, 150 degrees either way. The Achilles heel for me is that it's ETTL only. So I often want to shoot in manual mode, and when I turned that thing and I was like, okay, I can control everything just like, I thought, oh, this would be really cool because it's $100. But the fact that I don't have that manual, I don't have half my flash repertoire, just killed me. So there's a long answer, but I'm sure the STE3, whenever it comes out, will have that functionality, okay? All right, let me do this. I want to answer everybody's questions, but we've got 30 minutes, and if you want, we can do, democracy here. This is like the Occupy event space happening right now. We can look at a bunch of shoots where I've used wireless, and I can run you through a bunch of shoots and setups, or we can do questions, or we can do both. I can take 15 minutes or so and do shoots and setups, and we'll go as far as we can and then answer questions. Both? Okay. Does anybody, though, before we move on, because again, Occupy event space, all are equal. Does anybody have a question specifically relating to the on-camera control business that we've been going through? Yeah?
No, I just want to know if you brought
I have 6. And we'll start the bidding at $150. B&H will have them really soon. Okay. All right, so question about this part?
No, I just want to know, can you use speedlights in conjunction with other lights?
Can you use speedlights in conjunction with other lights? Like studio strobes? Absolutely. The challenge becomes if the studio strobes have an optical slave on them, then you'll need to run the speedlights. You need to get rid of the pre-flash. So this right there fired a pre-flash, okay? And made a lovely photo, as you guys will see. Okay, so is David back there or? Okay, we're going to change up this cord. Do you know how to do it? I can talk you through the steps. I just can't see.
Blind yourself there, Snap?
Yeah, it's that thing. All right.
Do you use the cord at a wedding if you're moving around?
Great question. No, I know you're getting. Oh, don't say the question. Can we use the cord at a wedding? No, that's the challenge. All right. Obviously, having a 30-foot cable running between you and your assistant can be very problematic. If you're shooting just, so what we're going to do? Wait. Let's see. This cord, that one pulls out, and that one plugs in. That's as easy as it is. Okay. So at a wedding, the cord's a liability. So if you get paid to shoot weddings, I think investing in the Pocket Wizard system makes a lot of sense. But it's an expensive buy-in because it's basically $200, $225 per unit. And you have to have a unit on your camera, and you have to have a unit for every one of your speedlights. Okay? So if you're shooting events, that's a good way to go. Yeah, question?
The capacitance of the cord, can you put 2 of them in series?
The cords? I've ganged up, it depends on the camera, and I don't have an explicit answer for this. You can gang up, I've ganged up 3 cords, so that's 100 feet, okay? I've ganged up those cords, and they fire just fine. And yet I have customers who've written and said, I can't get one cord to work. The 60D, some 60Ds have this like weird thing. It's like, I don't know if they have no oomph through the hot shoe. Some 60Ds work fine, others don't.
Is it Cat 5 cable you're using?
It's not Cat 5 cable. It's a little heavier than Cat 5. You know, Cat 6, I don't know. Question real quick.
In your garage, when you first designed it, how come you didn't put a capability of putting a flash on the part that goes onto the camera, besides the
Right. Because it would have made my head explode. As to why? Go ahead. Take your shot. I didn't repeat the question. So why didn't I put a hot shoe on top of the cord? Because
that's a good idea first.
I don't know. I have mixed emotions because I'm not sure how Canon's ETL system would meter for 2 masters, because you're effectively enabling 2 masters. So I've got that one being a master, and I've got the one on the hot shoe being a master. And I really buy into the keep it super simple principle.
But you can make the one on the hot shoe, on the camera a slave.
Lots of different options, and it became very cumbersome. I wanted a simple, straight solution. Okay, so how many speedlights? I'll give you the answers, but I want you guys to throw out some ideas. You got to throw them out loud. How many speedlights did I use to make this shot?
2.
Where was one of them? In the lampshade. Where was the other one? In the hot shoe. Okay, so I have a disabled master in my hot shoe, and there is the slave literally with the body of the slave rotated 180 degrees, so the sensor is pointing straight up. And the speed light, we put a rag on Arian's head so the speed light would balance. Literally, it was just kind of sitting there like this, okay, with the Stoffen dome diffuser. Okay, so 1 point for you guys. All right, how many speed lights in this shot? Good, it'd be handy if you had chapter 21 open, I think, in your book.
6.
6, 8, anybody else? 3 is the right answer. I'm really proud of the fact I pulled this shot off with 3 speedlights. Okay, so for the bonus question, which one of my sons is this? The youngest. This is Tony. Turned 14 day before yesterday, 14 going on 40. Okay, so this is an example of when the geometry of an in the hot shoe master will not work. Tony was just a couple feet in front of me. It was literally 118 degrees in Paso Robles this day. He didn't mind at first having all this water poured on him, but he's got no body fat because he's a strong young athlete. And after like 5 minutes, he was standing there shivering because of all this water that was being dumped on him. The geometry of the chute wouldn't work with the master and the hot shoe because basically I had the sun high behind Tony and I had the two slaves right over my shoulder angled steeply down, almost to mimic the angle of the sun. Those slaves, we couldn't orient those slaves so that the eye was facing the camera without them looking into the sun. So the easy go-to thing when we're shooting slaves in sun is to turn the slave eyes completely away from the sun and move the master on a cord to a spot where it literally fires straight into the sun. The master doesn't care if it's firing straight into the sun. So we've given the slaves a set of sunglasses by turning them away from the sun, heads pointed towards the subject, slave eyes pointing away. Drop the master literally on the ground about 15 feet behind me, and it just fired up and sent the signals to the slaves. This geometry absolutely would be unworkable because how do I know that? Because we tried. Again, I'm lazy. If I don't have to get out the cord, I don't want to get out the cord. Tried it with the master and the hot shoe. It didn't work. Got out the cord, turned everything around. It worked just fine. Here's my friend, Mark Kranak. All right. Anybody read the blog Jersey Style Photography? Mark's a great guy. You should read it. This is Mark and in Asbury Park. And Mark's got this film noir thing. I mean, he's got the gun. He's got the dame. He's got the Lucky Strike cigarettes. How many speedlights did I use to make this portrait of Mark in his, and I can't do black and white anymore. I did black and white forever. So even though film noir by definition is black and white, this is as close as I can get to film noir. It's got to be in color. How many speedlights did I use? Two. Two is the right answer. Where was the master? It was on one side or the other, okay? So actually, this says 3. I want to say if I was going to do this today, I'd do 2, okay? Just to show you again how that cord would work. We actually had 3 speedlights, master disabled in the hot shoe. If I'd had the cord at the time, I would have run the cord off to left or right. I used a grid and I used gels, okay? So the effect of the grid, we'll talk about this afternoon. The effect of the grid is that it creates that pattern. The effect of the gel is that it changes the color of the speedlight from being basically sunlight at midday to becoming a neon sign or a street light. Okay, how many flashes on this one? If you look really closely, you can see, now you're not going to be able to look anywhere else, you can see 2 arm shadows. Okay?
Oh, yeah.
So again, in the hot shoe master, disabled, communicating to 2 speedlights on a stand over here. And they were tipped sideways. And the way that I tipped them, I used, this is called a Elastilite tri-flash bracket. It can hold 3 speedlights. And I had 1 speedlight here and 1 speedlight here. So there was about 12 inches between the heads. And that's why you see 2 shadows if you look really closely in that shot. Can we use a transmitter receiver?
Canon, transmitters and receivers on camera. If you're going to disable a master,
Okay.
okay, you just want to get the information from the camera to the flashes. So can't you use a transmitter and a receiver?
So the question is, if you're just looking to get the information from the camera to the flashes, can you just use a transmitter and a receiver? The answer is yes, but the question becomes, how much information does that transmitter and receiver communicate? So ETTL radio triggers will communicate that full communication of master and slave business. Manual radio triggers only say fire now. Now a Pocket Wizard Multimax can say that over about a half mile, but in the case of using speedlights a half mile away, it's not really part of my arsenal. Okay, this is one of my favorite setups here. How many lights in this shot?
3.
3 is the right answer. Where are they?
One low, one.
One to the right, one to the left, and one in front.
Okay. The reason this is one of my favorite setups is it gives me an excuse to use my ray flash ring light adapter. All right? So I have taken my Speedlight in the hot shoe as a master, pushed it through the ray light, which basically sends that light down and around the lens and lets it fly out through a translucent panel. And that Speedlight is the master, enabled. So I get that look, that crazy hipster shadow of the ring light, and it's talking to 2 slaves that are behind the subject, all right? And one of the key bits of gear in my bag, even when I'm traveling light, I won't bring my book, but I have these, which tells you what I think of these, okay? These are Rogue flash benders, specifically the large size. Okay, they make a smaller size. I'm not as enamored with it, but the large is indispensable. And one of the things that we can do, and the key to making this shot work, is you can strap these guys on. Okay, and if I have a light behind my subject and it's flying up to create that hatchet light that's glancing off his shoulders and his cheeks, I don't want this to flare into the lens. So putting the Rogue flash bender on this Speedlight all of a sudden saved my hiney and gave me the ability to create this shot with that defined edge. This is sports. I was watching a little bit of ESPN last night, and I was like, they're now doing this in video, like in beer commercials. Anything on ESPN has this kind of 3-light setup. So you want to do sports lighting, you got to like graze the light across your subject's rugged face.
What is it called? Group B, Group B. So.
Let's go back and fly that.
Group B, Group B.
Okay, so the question is, the hatchet lights are both in Group B, all right, because I wanted them at the same power. If I'd wanted one side to be brighter than the other, I could have moved one light farther away because it's a hard light, so distance doesn't matter as much. Or I could have put it in Group C and run the thing in manual. But in this case, the typical, again, I'm taking the simplest approach I can. I want Group A on my ring light because it's my master. Group B is the hatchet lights, and I want them to be about the same brightness. So great question, though. Thanks for asking. All right, how many lights in this shot? And this will probably be the last one we look at. Maybe one more. Anybody want to venture a guess? 2. Good start. Let's add one more, shall we? I think. All right. So this is the earlier generation of what I used in this shot, and I'll show you the set shot in just a moment. I had a Westcott Apollo 28-inch softbox. It's square. This is the new one, the Orb, and I like this more because it's a little bit bigger. But what I did is I took the tri-flash bracket and I put 3 Speedlights on the cord. 1 is the master, 2 is the slaves, and we set it off. So here's what this shot looked like. Okay? Now, this afternoon in Lighting Persona, I'm going to talk about how I go about blending fill flash at sunset in. The short answer is I use CTO, color temperature orange gels, or half CTO. Let's see what I noted in the shoot. So full cuts of CTO. Okay, so a very amber gel is what allows me to push this flash in because I have the sunlight coming from camera left. In fact, there was so much hard sun that you can see we actually threw up a Lastolite skylight panel with a reflector in it, just basically to put the subject into shade. Okay? All right, one last one. It's a Chicago Bob. He is a living historian in Virginia City, Nevada, which is a fascinating place outside of Reno. How many Speedlights? 2, 1. Okay. More importantly, what was the time of day? Come on, be brave. Late afternoon. What was the weather outside?
Sunny.
Okay, here's the real answer. It was 3 Speedlights. It was pouring outside, and it was about 2 o'clock in a room that never sees direct sunlight. One of the cool things we can do is move the master, and I learned this from my sensei, Joe McNally, move the master to a window and have it communicate to speedlights outside. The joy of this system is I can change everything without having to run out in the rain time and time again. If I'm shooting in manual, I can dial the power up or down. Okay? So we went out and we put the speedlights up in a C-stand. We gelled them to give that amber color, that look of sunset. Okay? And we angled them so that the long raking shadows went horizontally, because that's what we know sunset light to look like. It's warm and the shadows go horizontally. The fact that it was raining, that just makes for a better story, but it really was raining. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and turn up the house lights, and we'll spend a few minutes answering questions.
Do you find the orb more rugged than the Apollo?
No, I'm laughing because when I was in Dubai week before last demoing the orb, I broke one. So actually, I have never had a problem with the, go ahead, kick me because I didn't answer the question. So the question was, do I find the orb to be more rugged than the original Apollo? I would say not. And I've only had an orb for about a month, and I managed to break it. I've yet to break a square Apollo, and I've done all kinds of things to them that should have broken them. So, but I will say this, I know from shooting it, I blogged about this on Speedlighting a month or so ago, the quality of light coming out of this and the catch lights in the eyes is gorgeous, gorgeous. So we do have, okay, and one thing to note, the Speedlight is firing backwards. That's the way that a Westcott Apollo softbox works. It's got that silver interior. And what I love about that is the light flies to the back, it hits the silver, jumps around, gets all mixed up, and then flies forward. Really soft light. The other softboxes I use are the Lastalite Easy boxes. And those have the Speedlight mount at the back of the softbox, and the light flies forward. And in order to get the light to meld around, there's an inner diffuser. This, where did we see the baby softbox? Wow, here it is. I was looking for blue and it's black. I was looking for the case and I'd already set it up. So this is, I love this, okay? This is the Lastalite Mini Easy Box. And when I talk about the inner diffuser, this is what I'm talking about here. And they make bigger ones, 20 and 28 inches. Okay, this is the small one that works on softbox, or directly on Speedlights. So, all right, question in the back.
You have your light way up high in the box. Do you find that creates uneven light?
So the question is, in this softbox right here, I have the Speedlight mounted up really high. Does that create uneven light? Not to my eye. I do try to angle the head down so that it hits about where the hub of the spokes is in the center. But I also have that would have that head zoomed out as wide as it would go to mix up that light as much as I can. The other way to think about that, though, I have a friend who shoots the Lastalite Easy Box exclusively, and he zooms his Speedlight at the back of that softbox to 105 almost all the time, and then he uses it in really, really close because that gives him a little bit of a vignette, a little bit of fall off inside the softbox. To a large degree, that's also a function of how close the softbox is to your subject. Question?
The Pocket Wizard TT5 and TTL5, Flex TT5, is it good for the strobes, to trigger the strobes?
So the Pocket Wizard Flex TT5 and TT1 is to trigger the strobes. So the way that system works is you have the TT1, which is hot shoe only, or the TT5, which can be in the hot shoe or attached to the slaves.
As a receiver.
As the receiver. So it's a transceiver, meaning it can either be the transmitter or the receiver. Okay? So you can use that system. There are some challenges with the Canon Speedlight in terms of if you go past about 35 or 40 feet, there's some radio interference that will make the signal communication a little bit inconsistent. I have to confess, I seldom use Speedlights 35 or 40 feet away from my camera.
No, I'm talking about studio strobes. Can you trigger monolights?
Ah, okay. So the question is, will those work with monolights? As far as I know, the Flex TT5 and TT1 are for Speedlights only, but I do know for a fact, because I've used them, they're fully backwards compatible with the entire Pocket Wizard line. So you can put a Plus or a Multimax on your monolight, and it will time the firing of that monolight at the right moment so that it doesn't get confused with the ETTL pre-flash if you're using speed lights. Is that your question? Did I get you the answer? Okay. Hold on one sec. We'll go over to this side. I just want to be fair. Occupy event space. It's very important.
In a room like this with a low white ceiling, what would you think about using your master flash pointing up to the ceiling?
So in a room like this, which has an 8-foot acoustic tile ceiling, what do I think about using my master flash in here just fired off the ceiling? What, enabled or disabled?
Enabled.
Enabled. If you're at an event, it can provide a little bit of light. What I'm often trying to do in a room like this is skip that light way to the back corner, because the folks up front often are lit well enough, but it's the light in the back. So I'll try to make that bank shot. The thing you have to be careful of anytime you bounce light off the ceiling is that anybody who has deep set eye sockets, if the light comes down steeply, their eyes can go dark. So sometimes if I'm bouncing, I'll also do my little hand thing behind the speed light so that it's in the hot shoe, and I'll just put my little hand up here. It's about a half CTO of warmth, and it flies most of the light up, but it also pushes a little bit of light forward into their eyes. I think the little slide is gimmicky in my opinion, the little catch light panel. I get better effect with my hand, plus I work, especially at events, I'm working really fast, and to have to pull this little thing out, and you know, it's just much easier to go boom, and I get my shot, and I'm moving on to towards the punch bowl. Okay, any more questions on this side? All right, question there.
What are your thoughts on using quantum flash with your Canon flash?
Okay, so what are my thoughts on using the quantum Q flash system with speedlights? My progression through the world of flash was when I was shooting medium format and view camera work for 15 years, I used studio packs. And then I started doing a lot of field work, so I still have it, my old quantum Q, like the original Q flash, 400 watt seconds. It's got a flash tube that's shaped like a hot dog, which is a fundamental difference between studio flashes and monolights and speedlights. Speedlight has a flash tube and a little reflector with that flat panel, and all the light flies forward. So if you're trying to fill up a softbox or you're trying to fill up an umbrella, it can be a challenge if that mod is really, really big. Small, not a big deal, but a 60 or 74-inch umbrella can be hard to fill up with one speedlight. Whereas a quantum or a studio pack has a tube shaped like a hot dog or like a donut. See how everything relates to food around lunchtime? Which throws the light in a sphere. It throws it out this way as well as out this way. So one of the advantages of the quantums is that, or to monolights and studio packs, is they fill up modifiers quite nicely. The quantum is an interesting spot in the market in terms of being significantly more powerful than speedlights. But what you really give up, and this is a huge issue for me, is true high-speed sync. I like the ability to shoot in high-speed sync when I need to, because I'm shooting outdoors under full sun a lot. So if you don't do that kind of work, if high-speed sync isn't really important to you, because there's a lot of workarounds. Pocket Wizard has hypersync, a lot of ways to cheat, and people say, well, we can increase the shutter speed. Well, if you get me from 200 to 500th, that's one stop change. I'm not going to dim the ambient light with one stop. You'll see this afternoon it takes 3 or 4 stops to do that. So I love quantums, but I also have some questions, about what I would really love, and I've said this publicly, I'll say it again. I would love a Canon Speedlight in the quantum form factor. Give me 400 watt seconds with ETTL technology, including high-speed sync. I'll sell all 3 kids to buy that, because I think for me that's the ultimate.
Did they know?
They've met my kids, so it's not going to happen. Just kidding, Mom. All right.
Do you have rechargeable battery or battery pack recommendations?
Yeah, I have. So do I have rechargeable battery pack recommendations? The short answer is I'm a huge fan of Eneloop batteries. Eneloops. They're, of course, I have the other brand here. I have Eneloops. Oh, I guess they're in here. Eneloops, E-N-E-L-O-O-P. E-N-E-L-O-O-P. They're here in the store somewhere. If it's not in the store, you don't need it. Eneloop batteries The reason I like them very quickly, they are pre-charged rechargeable. They're low discharge nickel metal hydride batteries. Problem with rechargeable batteries is if you charge them today and don't use them for a month, most of the charge is gone. But with Eneloops or any of the pre-charged rechargeables, Kodak makes them and other companies make them. Basically, if it says pre-charged and rechargeable, you're getting the battery technology that will have its low discharge nickel metal hydride. The other important side of it is your charger. Use chargers, and you'll have to ask the guys at the counter, find a charger that charges each battery on its separate circuit. 4 batteries coming out of a Speedlight do not discharge at identical rates, so one of them is going to be more discharged than the other. But if you put those 4 batteries into a charger that has a single charging circuit, it's going to stop charging when the first battery is charged. So it's this vicious kind of ping-pongy thing. Speedlight stops when the first battery wonks out. Charger stops when the first battery gets full. All right? So if you have a charger, an intermediate charger puts 2 batteries on a circuit. A really good charger will put each battery on an individual charging circuit. So I use a Maha 801D, M-A-H-A. And there are other chargers that do the same thing, but that's the importance. And the combination of using low discharge nickel metal hydride in a charger that has individual charging circuits has made my batteries being far more reliable than I deserve.
What was your number, Maha?
801D.
Do you light stand recommendations?
Light stands, absolutely. All my grip gear is made by Avenger and Manfrotto, although there's many other great manufacturers. I carry 2 light stands principally. I use the Manfrotto 5001B, which is the little light stand. It folds up, the legs fold backwards up on the shaft, so it becomes a 17-inch pack, all right? And then I also use the Manfrotto 5001, no, that's not right, that's the small one. I think it's the 1005, and it's what are called the raker stands, and those are the stands, they're 10-foot high stands, and they fold up, the legs fold up flat. So for somebody who travels as crazily as I do, of course I didn't bring any stands this trip, that's how light I'm trying to travel, but those stands are really great because I can put 3 stands together in a package about this big, and yet they open up to be full bases. I also have C stands, but I don't travel with them because I can rent a C stand anywhere. So, question?
Do you have any experiences with radio poppers versus the Quantum, the TTL transmitters?
So do I have any experience with the radio popper over the Pocket Wizard TT1s? Or
I think Quantum makes the ones that transmit TTL.
so Quantum has, as far as I know, Quantum has a module that works with their flashes in a TTL mode, which I've never used.
They told me on a show that they do, and it works with the Canon too, but I'm not sure.
You would think they would call me. I don't know. I have used radio poppers, and I found radio poppers to be very reliable. It's a different approach than Pocket Wizards in that the radio popper, you have to have a Speedlight in the hot shoe, and you have the transmitter, and it's basically picking up the electromagnetic pulse off the flash tube, sending that out in real time to the receivers, which reconvert that to an infrared signal. So the cover of Speedlighter's handbook was shot, the Smashing Pumpkins shot was shot with a dozen Speedlights on the set, all controlled with radio poppers. First generation radio poppers, the ones that had a little fiber optic probe. So I think that's great technology. There's some advantages to the Pocket Wizard system, particularly if you already have an infrastructure of Pocket Wizards that you're using in your studio already. One last question, anyone?
How many flash heads have you worn out?
How many flash heads have I worn out? All right. I have killed 3 Speedlights. One I did with my AA battery torture test summer before last. I imported every kind of rechargeable battery I could find, and that test fired like 25,000 full power flashes. And I learned a lesson very hard. I used lithium batteries as part of the test because a lot of people like lithium batteries. And I can tell you the problem with lithium batteries is that they get super hot. In fact, the first time I dropped them in my hand, they almost burned. A friend said, oh, get an infrared thermometer. So I did that for the second round with a different set of batteries. They came out at 180 degrees. So ultimately, I fried that flash head with the battery test. The other 2 Speedlights I broke during the same shoot one day, which was completely crazy too. I've done all kinds of things. These are really robust devices, but at a skate park with pulling a light stand over with the Speedlight on the top didn't end well for the Speedlight. So one bit of advice on that, if you're on a shoot and you're trying to impress your friends, do not flinch when anything hits the ground. If you flinch, then you're saying you're an amateur. If you want to be a pro, you just stand there and let your gear hit the ground like it's, you know, no big deal. And then you join Canon Professional Services, which costs you like $100 a year, and you get a 20% discount on repair bills. And I've made up that $100 pretty much every year, it seems like. But anyway.
Just go to your question. How can I? Where can you send me to find out how to set up my studio to use Speedlight with stroke?
Okay. So, all right. So websites. I'm gonna change your question. Websites that I like. Okay. So you've got to check out Zach Arias's blog, ZACKARIAS. Particularly if you want to learn how to shoot white seamless. So, which is part of a standard repertoire for anybody who wants to shoot. So if you literally Google Zach Arias white seamless, you'll go to his 3-part tutorial. But Zach has done a great job talking about ZACK and his last name ARIAS. ARIAS. So Zach Arias' blog. Heavy on studio lighting, strobist.com. David Hobby goes through the world of small flash and large flash. It's not studio oriented exclusively, but a lot of good insight and the archive of information. It's the most active lighting blog in the history of the blogosphere. Strobist, STROBIST. Okay. If you've not hit up Joe McNally's blog, Joe is the Indiana Jones of photographers. So always has a great story to tell and great lessons to learn. So from time to time, Joe gets in the studio as well. So those would be the 3 that I would jump at first. Okay. Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure.
For more information, please visit us online, give us a call, or stop by our New York City Superstore. You can also connect with us on the web.